All right. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for attending us today. My name is Wendy Bray, and I'm the program specialist here at VA OSDBU. We do have a few of our IRS colleagues here, and I'll introduce our presenter in a few minutes. I have on the call my colleague, Curtis Brandon, as well. I want to remind everyone that during our trainings, they are recorded. This training is currently being recorded, and a copy of the presentation will be sent out to everyone by tomorrow afternoon. A few housekeeping notes. I did leave open the chat and the Q&A. Please, any questions that you have, place them in the Q&A. The Q&A is located if you are on your laptop. On the right-hand side, you'll see three dots. Select those three dots, and then the Q&A will pull up for you. If you are on your mobile device, on the either right-hand side or the top, there are three dots. Select those dots. There are two tabs, One of them says Advanced. Click on Advanced, scroll down to the bottom, and you'll see the Q&A. We will be responding to your questions in the Q&A. Any questions in the chat is kind of difficult for us to follow. So I just want everyone to go ahead. Any questions that you have throughout this presentation, place them in the Q&A so that we can ensure that we are responding to your questions during this live session. So today, I want to introduce everyone to Ms. Anika Pompey from the IRS, Internal Revenue Service. Ms. Pompey's career with the IRS spans more than 17 years. She's held positions as the tax compliance officer before becoming the frontline manager for the TOC group and the contract representatives, and TOC means tax compliance officer. In these positions, she was responsible for planning and conducting examinations of individual income tax returns, assisting customers with their tax accounts, and educating taxpayers about tax law and tax-related accounting. Ms. Pompey is currently a senior stakeholder liaison, and her office is currently located in Washington, D.C. As a stakeholder liaison, she is responsible for establishing and maintaining those relationships with tax practitioners, business and industry organizations, and those other audiences to provide the education and outreach on IRS policies, practices, and the procedures. Anika and Ms. Cheryl, I want to thank you for joining us today to discuss the worker classifications. We often receive these questions from our participants concerning how to properly classify their personnel. So thank you for presenting, and I will now hand it over to you.
All right, thank you so much. I hope my audio is coming in clear.
Yes.
Okay, great. All right, so just give me one moment. I'm going to share my PowerPoint, and then we'll go ahead and get started. It's almost done loading. I apologize for that brief delay. All right, so hopefully everyone can see this PowerPoint.
Yes, we can see it.
Okay, awesome. All right. Okay, everyone. So good morning to you all, and thank you, Ms. Bray, for that wonderful introduction. I want to welcome you all to today's workshop, Worker Classification, Employee or Independent Contractor. So during today's workshop, we are going to go over a few things with you. First, we're going to define the terms employee and independent contractor. We're going to discuss the categories of evidence used to determine worker status. I'm also going to explain the use of Form SS8 and Form 8919. Then I'll discuss employer responsibilities for employees and independent contractors. And then finally, we are going to discuss the requirements of Section 530 relief. All right, so before we get started, I do want to note that this presentation is informational only. We are going to be providing you with information on what the law says in general, and about what factors and situations indicate a worker should be treated as an employee and which situations indicate a worker should be treated as an independent contractor. We will not be able to provide you with a specific answer to your individual situation. Worker classification determinations are made on a case-by-case basis, depending on the specific facts and circumstances. So, and we're going to talk a little later in the presentation on how you can request a determination from the IRS for your workers. Okay, so I know this question comes up a lot. Is my worker an independent contractor or is my worker an employee? And how do I know? So for federal tax purposes, this is a very important distinction. Worker classification affects how you're going to pay your federal income tax, Social Security tax, and Medicare taxes, as well as how you file your tax return. And if a worker is an employee, then the employer is responsible for withholding income tax and in the employee's portion of the Social Security and Medicare tax from amounts paid to the worker. The employer is also responsible for paying over to the IRS the employer's portion of Social Security and Medicare tax, as well as paying federal unemployment tax. Now, on the other hand, the business is not responsible for any payroll taxes for an independent contractor. Now, many companies believe that they can just choose whether to treat a worker as an employee or an independent contractor, but there are laws that determine whether the worker is an employer or if they're an independent contractor. So the first step is to properly classify your worker. Now this screen shows you a picture of publication 1779, independent contractor or employee. The information that we're going to be, I'm going to be covering for you is discussed in this publication as well as on the IRS website. And links to both the publication and the web pages are going to be provided to you in an email along with this PowerPoint after this workshop. I believe Ms. Bray mentioned she would have it sent to you all by tomorrow. Now, let's go ahead and define these two terms. An employee is an individual who performs services for a firm and who is subject to the firm's control regarding what will be done and how it will be done. If the employer retains the right to direct and control the means and the details of the work, then the worker is an employee. Now, in contrast to that, an independent contractor is an individual who performs services for a firm, but the firm only controls the result of the work. They do not control the means or the method of accomplishing that work. Now, generally, there are three main categories of evidence that show whether a worker is an employee or an independent contractor. They are behavioral control, financial control, and types of relationships of the parties. So, in regard to behavioral control, some of the questions you may want to ask yourself is, does the company control or have the right to control what the worker does and how the worker does his or her job? In regards to financial control, you want to ask yourself, are the business aspects of the worker's job controlled by the payer? These can include things like how the worker is paid, whether expenses are reimbursed, or who provides tools, supplies, etc. And when you consider the type of relationship, some things you might want to ask yourself are there written contracts or are there employee type benefits such as pension plans, insurance, vacation pay, etc.? And will the relationship continue and is the work performed a key aspect of the business? So businesses, they have to weigh all of these factors when determining whether a worker is an employer or an independent contractor. And some factors that indicate that the worker is an employee, while other factors may indicate that the worker is an independent contractor. There really is no magic set of numbers or number of factors that make the worker an employee or an independent contractor, and there is no one factor that stands alone in making this determination. Also, factors which are relevant in one situation may not be relevant in another situation. The keys are to look at the entire relationship. So you want to look at the relationship as a whole. You want to consider the degree or extent of the right to direct and control the work. And then finally, you need to document each of the factors used in coming up with the determination. Next, we're going to look at each of these factors in a little more detail.
Before you continue, Anika, there is a question in the Q&A. Would you be able to answer it before the next one?
Let me see. Okay, so if I hire a 1099 contractor to work full time for me and I direct the work, is he, she an employee? Okay, so as I mentioned previously, each situation is different. So I wouldn't be able to give you a yes or no answer without, well, I wouldn't be able to give you an answer at all. We actually have a unit that does these determinations, and you would have to fill out the appropriate forms and have them make that determination for you.
And before we continue, I just want to check and make sure that everyone is able to see the slides. I know that I can see them, but just want to make sure because I've seen someone say that they're not able to see the slide. Okay, perfect. All right, I'll turn it back over to you, Anika.
Okay. All right. So first we're going to look at behavioral control. So the key issue for behavioral control, um, the key issues are instructions and training. So types of instruction can include things like, when and where to do the work, what tools or equipment to use, what workers to hire or to assist with the work, when to purchase supplies and service, what work must be performed by a specific individual, and then what order or sequence to follow when performing the work. So the degree of instruction means that the more detailed the instruction, the more control the business exercises over the worker. So more detailed instructions indicate that the worker is an employee. Less detailed instructions reflect less control, indicating that the worker may be an independent contractor. The next factor is the evaluation system. So if an evaluation system measures the details of how the work is performed, then these factors would point to an employee. If the evaluation system measures just the end result, this too can point to either an independent contractor or an employee. And then finally, there's training. Now, training means explaining the detailed methods and procedures to be used in performing a task. So if the business provides the worker with training on how to do the job, this indicates that the business wants the job done in a particular way, and this is strong evidence that the worker is an employee. Periodic or ongoing training about procedures and methods is even stronger evidence of an employer-employee relationship. So when you're looking at behavioral control, the key fact to consider is whether the business retains the right to control the worker and the details of how the services are performed, regardless of whether the business actually exercises those rights. And I'm going to give you an example. A plumber agrees to install plumbing in a new warehouse being built. Upon arriving at the warehouse, the plumber is given the building plans showing where the plumbing is to be installed and advised that the plumbing must be completed within 5 days. This is direction of what is to be done, rather how it is to be done, and it's consistent with independent contractor status. Now, let me give you another example which points more towards an employee. Now, a plumber works out of a local plumber's union office. The warehouse general contractor tells the plumber what plumbing has to be done. He gives specific instructions on installation, the tools to use, and the order in which the plumbing is to be installed. These are more specific instructions on how work is to be performed and are consistent with employee status. Next, we're going to look at another set of factors, those relating to financial control. So, financial control refers to whether or not the business has the right to control the financial aspects of the worker's job. So, let's talk about several different ways that a business exercises financial control. First, there's the investment. An independent contractor often has a significant investment in the equipment he or she uses, in working for someone else. However, in many occupations, such as construction, workers spend hundreds of dollars on the tools and equipment that they use, and they're still considered employees. So there are no precise dollar limits that must be met in order to have a significant investment. Furthermore, a significant investment is not necessary for independent contractor status, as some types of work simply don't require large expenditures. Next are expenses. Employers are more likely to reimburse employees for their job expenses, while businesses usually do not reimburse independent contractors for their expenses. However, employees may also incur expenses that are not reimbursed. So let me just give you an example. A teacher buys erasers, posters, and other minor supplies throughout the year. She is not reimbursed for these expenses, but minor expenses incurred by an employee don't indicate an independent contractor relationship. She is an employee. Now, the opportunity to make a profit or loss is another important factor. So, if a worker has a significant investment in the tools and equipment used, and if the worker has an unreimbursed expenses, then the worker has a greater opportunity to lose money. For example, their expenses will exceed their income from the work. So, having the possibility of incurring a loss indicates that the worker is an independent contractor. Now, we also want to consider the availability of services. Are the workers' services available to the market? Independent contractors, they often advertise, maintain a visible business location, and are available for the relevant market. Also, an independent contractor is generally free to seek out other business opportunities. Finally, the method of payment must be considered. What method of payment does the worker receive? Are they paid by the job or the hour? Hourly, weekly, or similar basis of payment in return for labor generally is evidence of an employer-employee relationship. A flat fee is generally evidence of an independent contractor, especially if the worker incurs the expense of performing the services. So again, just as the behavioral control factors, there is no one factor that takes precedence over the other. It's really a matter of looking at the whole relationship and seeing where the preponderance of evidence lies. All right, so last, we're going to take a look at the type of relationship between the two parties. So, is there a written contract? Although a contract may state that the worker is an employee or an independent contractor, this is not sufficient to determine the worker's status. The IRS is not required to follow a contract stating that the worker is an independent contractor responsible for paying his or her own self-employment tax. How the parties work together determines whether the worker is an employee or an independent contractor. Are employee type benefits provided? Employee benefits include things like insurance, pension plans, paid vacations, sick days, disability insurance. Businesses generally don't grant these benefits to independent contractors. However, the lack of these type of benefits does not necessarily mean that the worker is not an independent contractor. Sorry, it doesn't mean that they are an independent contractor. Now, how permanent is the relationship is something else you want to consider. If you hire a worker with the expectation that the relationship will continue indefinitely rather than for a specific project or period, this is generally considered evidence that the intent was to create an employer-employee relationship. And are the services provided a key activity of the business? If a worker provides a services that are a key aspect of your regular business activity, it's more likely that you will have the right to direct and control his or her activities. So, for example, If a law firm hires an attorney, it's likely that they will present the attorney's work as its own and would have the right to control or direct that work. And this would indicate an employer-employee relationship. Now, we often get questions from business owners about how to treat casual labor or day labor. For each worker, you will need to look at all of the factors, just as we discussed, and see whether they indicate an employee or an independent contractor. The length of time that the worker performs services for you is not a standalone factor in determining his or her status. A worker can be an employee even if he or she only performs a few hours of service for the business. All right. So the next thing we'll talk about is the determination. Now, in each case, it's very important to consider all the facts. No single fact provides the answer. Businesses must weigh all these factors when determining whether a worker is an employee or an independent contractor. Some factors may indicate that the worker is an employee, while other factors indicate that the worker is an independent contractor. Like I mentioned before, there's no magic or set number of factors that make the worker an employee or an independent contractor, and no one factor alone is going to make this determination. Also, factors which are relevant in one situation, again, they might not be relevant in another. So the key is to look at the entire relationship and consider the degree or extent of the right to direct and control. So if you are not certain whether the worker is an employee or an independent contractor, you may wish to review publication 1779. I mentioned that to you guys earlier. That's independent contractor or employee publication. And this publication provides more information on these factors of evidence. There is also publication 15-A, Employer's Supplemental Tax Guide, and that provides in section 2, employee or independent contractor, some industry specific examples of who is an employee and who is an independent contractor. And if after referring to these resources, you're still not sure if the worker is an employee or an independent contractor, you can submit Form SS8 to the IRS. Now, the title to this form is a little lengthy. The title of this form is Determination of Worker Status for Purpose of Federal Employment Taxes and Income Tax Withholding. As you can see, that is a mouthful, so we're just going to refer to that form as Form SS8 throughout this presentation. Now, the IRS will review the Form SS8. They'll review the facts and circumstances, and then they'll officially determine if the worker status for you. Now, all of these resources I just mentioned, again, they are going to be included in the resource document that was created for this workshop, and you guys will get a copy of that by tomorrow. Or if you like, if you want to take a look at them right away, you can just key in the publication or the form number on irs.gov, and it should come up in your search. Now, Form 8919, this form is uncollected Social Security tax and Medicare taxes on wages. Now, workers who believe that they've been improperly classified as an independent contractor, they can actually use this form to tell the IRS that they believe that they should be employees and report their share of Social Security and Medicare taxes. Now, on this form, the worker has to select one of 4 reasons why they believe they're an employee rather than an independent contractor. And for some of the reason codes, a Form SS8 must have already been filed. For others, the worker is required to file the SS8 before filing his or her tax return. Now, in the past, the IRS advised those who believed that they were misclassified as independent contractors rather than employees to modify the Form 4137 and file it with their tax returns to report their share of the Social Security taxes and Social Security and Medicare taxes, excuse me. But we're no longer asking them to complete that form. Moving forward, they would just file the Form 8919. Now, as soon as the SS8 is received into the program, it is screened for completeness and processability. Now, if the SS8 is incomplete, it will be returned to the worker or the firm for the specific information that is needed. Now, the most common reasons why this form is returned is because there's no original signature, paid documents aren't included, or all of the questions are not filled out, or the term NA was used. Now, the form is going to be unprocessable if the taxpayer receives supplemental wages, as such as bonuses and or commissions. If there was no directions on how to report your income, if the taxpayer received college scholarships or fellowships or some type of stipend, or if the taxpayer received a K1, a Schedule K1. Now, when the SSA is returned, there is an explanation of why we can't process it, or if we're requesting additional information, then the letter will outline the additional information that we need. There is also a phone number and a return. You have to make sure that a phone number and a return address is provided to the taxpayer. All right, so let's talk about employer responsibilities. We're going to go into details on the responsibilities that you have if your workers are considered an employee. We're going to go over eligibility to work legally in the United States. We'll go over Form W-4. We're going to go over the Social Security number verification, Form W-2, and how to file those forms, or at least the Form W-2. All right. So as an employer, you are responsible for determining that employees are legally eligible to work in the United States. So to work in the United States, the employee must be a U.S. citizen, a national, or a lawful permanent resident, or they must have been granted authorization to work in the United States. So U.S. citizenship and immigration services, or USCIS, they're going to require that all employers and employees complete Form I-9, Employment Eligibility Verification. And while citizens and nationals of the U.S. are automatically eligible for employment, they too must present proof of identity and employment eligibility by completing the Form I-9. And as an employer, you have to complete the employer section of the form. And this certifies that you have reviewed original documents establishing the identity and employment eligibility of the employee. Now, Form I-9 does list several documents or a combination of documents that the employee can show you to satisfy this requirement. So, for example, as an employee may provide a U.S. passport or a driver's license or a birth certificate. You can find the Form I-9 as well as other information about it on the USCIS website. That's www.uscis.gov/I-9. Now, the employee has 3 business days from the date that employment begins to show you that required documentation, or a receipt for a replacement document if the documents were lost, stolen, or destroyed. And while you can terminate the employment of any employee who does not submit a completed Form I-9 and the required documentation, you must apply this rule to all of your employees. Employers are not responsible for the authenticity of documents. However, if a document does not appear genuine, do not accept it. You don't need to file the I-9 with USCIS, but you must keep the I-9 for 3 years after the date of hire, or 1 year after employment ends, whichever is later. And for more information, we do encourage you to view our virtual small business tax workshops. We have a lesson on hiring people who live in the U.S. but who aren't U.S. citizens. And you can find that on the IRS video portal at www.irsvideos.gov. And you'll find that in the business tab. Now, let's talk about the W-4. Each employee has to complete a Form W-4, Employees Withholding Allowance Certificate. Additional information on completing this form is located in the instructions for Form W-4. Use the employee's gross wages and the information on the Form W-4 to calculate the amount to withhold. If an employee does not give you a signed W-4, withhold tax at the single rate with no adjustments. And if an employee claims to be exempt from withholding, that exemption only applies to income tax, not to Social Security or Medicare taxes. That is, Social Security and Medicare taxes, we commonly refer to them as the FICA taxes. And employees claiming exemption from withholding, they must submit a new W-4 each year by February 15th to reestablish their exempt status. Now let's talk about verifying the Social Security numbers. This is another responsibility as an employer, and that you're required to get the employee's Social Security number to enter them onto the Form W-2. Now you should ask the employee to show you his or her Social Security card, and although not required, you can keep a copy of the card for your files. Now, to verify a worker's Social Security number, the Social Security Administration website does offer some help. You can use the Social Security Number Verification Service to verify up to 10 names and Social Security numbers instantly, or you can upload batches of up to 250,000 names and the numbers and receive the results over the very next business day. So to explore the options further and to become a registered user, you just need to visit the Social Security website. That's www.ssa.gov. And when you use the Social Security verification, the Social Security Administration will only tell you if the name and Social Security number match. They are not going to tell you the correct Social Security number. So if the name and the number don't match, it's up to you to get the correct name and or Social Security number from your employee. The website address for the Social Security number verification system is www.ssa.gov/employer/SSNV. You can go to the Social Security website and also do a search for Social Security number verification in the search box, and it should come up in your search results. Now, E-Verify is the Social Security Administration's program that verifies a name matches a Social Security number. And with that said, a person in the United States may have a valid Social Security number, but not be authorized to work in the United States. So E-Verify is a web-based system that allows enrolled employers to confirm the eligibility of their employees to work in the United States. E-Verify employers verify the identity and employment eligibility of newly hired employees by electronically matching information provided by employees on the Form I-9 Employment Eligibility Verification against records available to the Social Security Administration and the Department of Homeland Security. And E-Verify can be accessed but at www.e-verify.gov. All right, so let's move on and talk about the Form W-2. I know this seems like a lot of responsibility for employees, but again, that's why making that determination and making a correct determination is so important. So lastly, let's talk about the W-2. Now, as an employer, you must complete a Form W-2 wage and tax statement for each of your employees at the end of each year. So the Form W-2 shows the amount of compensation paid to employees and the amount of taxes withheld for the year, among other things. The Social Security Administration also uses this form to update an employer's lifelong earning history, and then from that earning history, they will calculate the employee's benefits. Now, because this information is so important, You can be assessed a penalty for W-2 names and social security numbers that do not match. You want to refer to the instructions for Form W-2 and W-3 for more information on the penalties. So, as you can see, it's important that employees' names and social security numbers, as shown on the Form W-4, match your payroll records and your Form W-2. Now, when you hire new employees, you always want to verify the name and social security number and ask them to show you their social security card if it's available. Like I mentioned before, it is okay to make copies of the social security card, but as I said before, you are not required to. Make sure you keep your payroll records up to date, and this is going to apply to both new and existing employees. And you also want to remind employees to report any changes, any name changes due to marriage, adoption, divorce, or any other circumstances, first to the Social Security Administration and then to you. And make sure employees know that notifying their employer of a name change is not enough. They have to complete Form SS5, which is the application for a Social Security card, to have the change made on their Social Security record. And Form SS5 and additional information can be found on the Social Security Administration website. You can just do a keyword search for Form SS5 and it should show up in your search results. Now, all employers, they have to issue Form W-2 to report wages and withholding to their employees by January 31st. And if your employee leaves before the end of the year, you have the option to give them the Form W-2. You can give it anytime after they leave, just as long as it's before January 31st. And if any employee asks for their W-2, you just have to make sure you have it to them either 30 days after their last pay date or 30 days after they leave, whichever is later. And you can file the Form W-2s electronically with the Social Security Administration. Companies that are filing 250 or more W-2s, they have to electronically file. And you know what? That regulation actually changed this year. If you have up at least 10 information returns, they have to be filed electronically, no matter whether they're W-2s, 1099s, they have to be filed electronically. And then, of course, electronic copies of the W-2 have to be sent to the Social Security Administration by January 31st. Now, let's talk about the independent contractors and your responsibilities for them. Now, in many cases, the tax law requires payers, such as small businesses or sole proprietors, to report IRS payments they made to subcontractors. Other, excuse me, they have to report payments that they've made to subcontractors to the IRS. And Form 1099 NEC is the form that is most commonly used by payers to report payments made in the course of trade or business. And if you've made the determination that the person you're paying is an independent contractor, then the first step is to have the contractor complete the Form W-9, because they too are required to complete the Form W-9. And then this form can be used to request the correct name and taxpayer identification number or their social security number. And either the taxpayer identification number, it can be either the social security number or it can be an employer identification number. Either number works. The social security number, of course, is the 3 to 4 digit format, whereas an EIN has a 2-digit format. So it's 2 digits with a dash followed by 7 more digits. And the W-9 should be kept in your files for 4 years for future reference in case any questions from the worker or from the IRS. Now, if your worker is an independent contractor and you've paid them $600 or more for services that they provided during the year, you are required to file the Form 1099 NEC. If you've paid them less than $600, you aren't required to file the form, but it is, it's a nice courtesy to complete the form and provide it to the worker. And then a copy of the 1099 NEC has to be provided to the worker by the 31st of the year following payment. And you must also send a copy of this form to the IRS by February 28th. Now remember, you only need to file it with the IRS if you've paid someone $600 or more. Now also note that independent contractors may have their own employees, or they may hire other independent contractors, which they'll refer to as subcontractors. In either case, they should be aware of their tax responsibilities for their subcontractors. As an employer, if you hire an independent contractor, your reporting responsibility is only for that independent contractor. If they in turn decide to hire subcontractors, then they have the responsibility of filing the appropriate forms for their subcontractors. And there are certain situations where a 1099 is not required. And you can, those exceptions, they're listed in the 1099 instructions, and you can find those on the IRS website. Okay, so here's what the form 1099 NEC looks like. So to be sure to review the 1099 instructions for when you report income paid and to whom. So most of the time, the payments are made to independent contractors. They're going to be reported in box 1 for non-employee compensation, which is generally going to be subject to self-employment tax. There are a few examples of payments to be reported in box 7, which include professional service fees such as attorney fees, accountants, architects, contractors, and engineers. Fees paid by one professional to another, such as of fee splitting or referral fees. And then also fees paid to non-employees, including like travel reimbursement for which the person didn't account to the payer. And if the fee and reimbursement has to be reported if it's at least $600. All right, so let's talk about misclassification of workers, because there can be penalties associated with the misclassification of workers. So as we've seen, the status of a worker is either an independent contractor or an employee, and it has to be determined accurately in order to ensure that the worker and the business can anticipate and meet their tax responsibilities. And businesses that decide whether to hire employees or independent contractors, depending on individual needs, customer expectations, and worker availability. Either worker classification, whether it's independent contractor or employee, it can be a valid and appropriate business choice. Now, the majority of classifications of workers are not challenged by the IRS, but when they are, there is usually an agreement between the IRS and the business after the facts and circumstances are jointly reviewed. Now, the next few slides are going to address the application of Section 530 of the Revenue Act of 1978. And in certain circumstances, Section 530, it can relieve businesses of employment tax liability resulting from worker misclassification. Now, Section 530, it does provide businesses with relief from federal tax obligations if certain requirements are met. It terminates the businesses, but not the workers, liability for the following employment taxes: federal income tax withholding, Social Security and Medicare tax, and then the federal unemployment tax. It also means that the business is not required to pay any interest or penalty resulting from the liability for employment taxes. Now, information on Section 530 relief, it can be found in publication 1976, Section 530 relief requirements. This publication can be found on the IRS website. You could do a keyword search for Section 530 relief, but a hyperlink to this publication is also included in your resource document. Now, the business has to meet 3 requirements to receive relief under Section 530. That is reasonable basis, substantive consistency, and reporting consistency. And meeting these 3 tests means that the business will not owe employment taxes for the workers in question. Now, first, the business must have a reasonable basis for not treating the worker as an employee. So, to establish that you had a reasonable basis for not treating the worker as an employee, you can show that you reasonably relied on a court case about federal taxes or ruling issued to you by the IRS, or your business was audited by the IRS at a time when you treated similar workers as independent contractors and we did not reclassify those workers as employees, or you treated the workers as independent contractors because you knew that was how a significant segment of your industry treated similar workers, or you relied on some other reasonable basis. For example, you might have relied on written advice of a business lawyer or an accountant who knew the facts about your business. Now, if you don't have a reasonable basis for treating the worker as an independent contractor, you are not going to meet the relief requirements. Now, the business has to demonstrate consistency, and they have to demonstrate two types of consistency. First, the business has to treat all workers in similar positions the same. This is called substantive consistency. The business and any predecessor business, they must not have treated the worker or any similar workers as employees. And if you treated similar workers as employees, this relief provision is not available. In other words, treatment of workers must be consistent with the position that they were not employees. So, for example, if a business treated a worker as an independent contractor, it must treat all workers in a similar position as independent contractors. Secondly, the business must file all required federal tax returns on a consistent basis, and this is called reporting consistency. So, this means that if a business believes that a particular worker or group of workers are properly classified as independent contractors, then the business must demonstrate to the IRS that they have the filing requirement. They filed the required forms, such as the 1099 NEC, for those independent contractors. And as you will recall, if you pay someone $600 or more for services performed on the calendar year, then you must report the payment to the worker on the 1099 NEC. So the business must have filed the Form 1099 NEC for each worker unless that worker made less than $600. So let me just give you an example. If a business had 20 drywallers working for them and treated 15 as employees and 5 as independent contractors, then the consistency test is not met. Relief is not available for any year that the business did not file the required Form 1099 NEC. And if they filed the required Form 1099 NEC for some workers, but not for others, relief is only available for the workers for which they filed the 1099 NEC. Now, if a business that mistakenly but in good faith filed the wrong form of 1099, they don't lose their ability to request relief under Section 530. So this slide is just showing you some resources that are available on irs.gov. If you go to the IRS homepage and type in the search box, worker classification, you'll find several search results that will provide you with some really good information. And again, I do have a handout that you all will receive, and it includes various URLs from the IRS website for publications, web pages, videos, so forth and so on. And then also in that document as well is going to be a link to the Form SS8 as well as publication 1976. All right, so that is all the information I have for you guys. I know that was a lot to take in. Hopefully when you guys get the slides and the resource document, you can take some time to go through the information accordingly. But let's go to Q&A and see if we have any questions here.
Thank you, Anika. I know Cheryl has been in the Q&A and responding to some of the participants. There was a question that said, we employ medical personnel, including MDs, which will be directed by the needs at the VA, etc. Some of our personnel are retired veterans that want more money and less benefits, like medical, since they have medical from the government. We maintain the ability to control if required, but the daily needs direct the efforts. Can you provide an example or further in depth of the thought?
Okay, give me one moment. And you said this was in the Q&A?
Yes. From Brandon at 11:15 a.m.
Okay, awesome. I don't see that question. Can you read that to me again?
Okay, it says we employ medical personnel, including MDs, which will be directed by the needs at the VA, etc. Some of our personnel are retired veterans that want more money and less benefits, like medical, since they have medical from the government. We maintain the ability to control if required, but the daily needs direct the efforts. Can you provide an example or further depth of the thought?
No, I'm not sure that I can provide an example off the top of my head. Is it possible for you to email me that question, Wendy?
Yes, I'll
Okay.
email it to you.
Okay.
And then we had another question that says, is 1099 NEC required for S Corp independent consultants?
Let me understand. Are you an S corporation and then you are hiring independent consultants?
If you can place that, Raj, they said the consultant is an S Corp.
The consultant is an S corp.
Yes. So would they be considered a 1099 NEC, or would they be required to complete a 1099 NEC?
So you're paying a consultant whose the business entity is set up as an S corporation?
Yes.
Okay, so they might fall under the exceptions for issuing a 1099, but I would just have to follow up because I will have to go back and review those exceptions. Is is it a way that we can get a copy of the Q&A today? Because I want to make sure that the responses that I provide um, are accurate and
Okay.
correct.
Yes. So
Okay.
I'll send those over to you.
Okay.
Those look like the only questions that we have in the Q&A. I see that we do still have 7 minutes, so I'm just going to look at the chat to see if anybody placed anything in the chat,
Okay.
because sometimes we do have participants place them in the chat. That can a business, it jumped. Can a business classify all employees as independent contractors, but pay some as employees, but give those employees a 1099 instead of a W-2? This would be particularly for a trucking company.
Well, again, you would have to you would have to consider all of the factors, the behavioral, financial, and the type of relationship to determine whether or not your workers are actually independent contractors versus employees. We can't just decide um, whether you can't just off the top of your head say that some of them are employees and some of them are contractors and give them different income documents. So if you need assistance with like making that determination of their employee status, then I would suggest maybe filling out a form SS8.
We did have a question come into the chat that asked if employees could self-designate themselves as contractors. So they said they have a paid employee position, but the employee doesn't want to be in a W-2 employee. They want to be a consultant. So could they self-designate that for themselves?
Again, you would have to consider the factors to determine whether they are an employee or a contractor. Now, if you look at the factors and it's leaning more towards they're an employee, then maybe you want to make some changes to the parameter of your relationship so that they can be treated as a contractor. But they can't just come in and say, I just want you to treat me as a consultant if how your relationship is set up leans more towards employee.
This question says, I'm a retired military member who works as an independent contractor. My business is a contracted catering business. Do I pay Social Security insurance for myself?
So if you're set up as a sole proprietor, then you complete form it's a Schedule SE when you file your tax return. And so the Schedule SE essentially is you paying into your Social Security and Medicare taxes.
Okay. This was a question about an audit. They said we're at the tail end of an EDD audit. Does the IRS perform audits as well?
So I don't believe, and I'll have to circle back. I know that we can worker classification can come up in audits. I don't know that we do audits specifically to address worker classification. I think it's more so that they might come up as an issue during an audit, if that makes sense. Like you might get contacted about an audit for some other issues on your tax return. And let's say if salary is one of the issues that's being audited, then there will be some in-depth questions asked about the employees and the type of work for you they do for you, and the nature of their positions and things like that. And if it seems that you've misclassified how you pay these workers, then it could lead to us addressing the misclassification.
And I'm going to ask one more question, and then I'll send the rest of the questions, the unanswered questions to you. But I'm scrolling through the chat, and this one says, you mentioned that we can make a copy of Social Security cards for I-9 verification purposes. I'm guessing that's a question that they are allowed to make the copy of the Social
Yeah,
Security
so
card.
you can for your records, you can make a copy. It's not required. So it's really whether you're comfortable with maintaining those types of records.
Scroll up. Okay. All right, perfect. Thank you everyone for attending. I'm going to take these questions, any questions that were not answered, and I'll review in the chat once I'm able to download the report and send them over to Anika. Anika, I want to thank you and Cheryl. Thank you so much for hosting this training today. I know this is something that our participants have been looking forward to. I think, is there another slide, or did you already pass it with your
No,
contact information?
I didn't. I'm
Okay,
sorry.
okay.
Thank you for mentioning that. So, as I mentioned before, I'm a stakeholder liaison in Washington, D.C. I also cover Northern Virginia, but I do have a colleague in Virginia, Cheryl, who has been so graciously manning the Q&A section for me. And she covers she's like Richmond based. So anything like south and east of Richmond, you know, like Hampton Roads area. And then my colleague Al, he's based in Washington, D.C. with me, but he also covers the area of Central Virginia. So you can contact any of us with any questions that you might have. We cannot answer account related questions. So if you have a specific question about your tax account, I'm sorry, we cannot help you there. You'll have to call the business tax line. But if you have just general questions, or you need to be pointed in directions for some specific information, feel free to reach out to us. If you want to share any concerns about IRS procedures or processes, maybe you've been trying to work with IRS on a certain type of during a process and it's not working out, or there's some failures in that process that you might want to identify, you can let us know that as well, because we do elevate those issues and concerns to the respective business units.
All right, thank you. Thank you both. And thank you for sharing that information. Everyone, this information is included in the presentation. So if you didn't write it down right now, it will be sent out to you by tomorrow afternoon. So thank you. I hope everyone enjoys the rest of their day, and I'm going to end this session.
All right. You guys have a great day.